Today, I'm going to talk about constraint as a guide to creativity in our work. I'm interested in constraint because the medium that I work in, live theater, is very constrained. We're constrained by space, time, money, and physics. And yet, engaging with and even welcoming this constraint can open up new ideas and can now allow us to defy time, space, money, and even physics. I'm going to talk to you about a show called When It Rains, which I wrote and directed and which I developed over a number of years with collaborators. Before I get into that too deeply, I'm going to move myself into my position, and I'll tell you who my collaborators are. Christian Berry is the sound designer and my artistic co-director. Lisa Hamilton is the costume designer. Louisa Adamson is the production and stage manager. Andrea Wilson is the producer for 2B. There are 4 characters in the show who have been played by 5 different actors: Connor Green, Samantha Wilson, Francine DeShepper, Sebastian LaBelle, and Mark Ben-David. Lastly, Nick Bottomley is the projection designer for the show, and really it's his work that I'm going to be focusing on today. I'm going to talk about the show's development. I'll show you some of the things about the design, and with the help of actress Anne-Marie Kerr, I'll show you some scenes from the play. When It Rains sprang from a number of creative impulses, one of which was my interest in working within constraint. For this show, we actually gave ourselves a number of self-imposed constraints. The first, and really the most important, was that we wanted to use a projector as the only source of light to tell the story. More and more theater directors and producers are using projectors as a tool in the kit. It's a really powerful tool. I mean, it can change colors in an instant. It can give you dynamic and detailed imagery. I mean, you can tell a whole story with a projector, which would be a movie. But of course, we're not making movies. We have a 3-dimensional art form with live actors, actors who need to be lit, actors who need to be in a context, actors who are at their most interesting when they're part of an interesting story. I wanted to see what kind of storytelling was possible with just one light, albeit a very powerful one that could create environments and settings. Now, the implications of this constraint is that the projection design becomes the lighting design, becomes the set design.
What are the chances?
Of what?
That we'd be here.
What do you mean, like here at home? I don't know, pretty good, I guess.
No, I don't mean that. Well, in a way, yes, that. I don't know. I mean, here we are, we have happiness.
Yes.
We're living in one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
Yeah, but wealth isn't happiness.
No, I know, but we're happy.
Yeah, we are.
And we both have jobs we like.
Well...
No, really, they could be a lot worse.
Yes, no, that's true.
And we've been blessed.
Well, blessed implies a blesser, but I see what you're saying. Go on.
Really, think about it. This little coagulation of rock happens to have water and air. And life sparked itself into existence, and cells divided, and Neanderthals died off, but for some reason, Homo sapiens didn't.
Yes, okay.
And Columbus didn't hit a sandbar and sink and drown, and well, our ancestors didn't die in the plague, and Hitler lost, and here we are. Having dinner in safety, and we are happy. So what are the chances?
Oh, those chances? 976 billion to 1, roughly.
You see, that is a rare kind of love.
Yeah, but I mean, if things had gone differently, if at any point along the way, you know, something else had happened, events would have verged in a different direction, and somebody else would be sitting here equally happy having this same conversation. Maybe they'd be Neanderthals. Maybe they'd be Nazi Neanderthals. No, think of all the events that weren't and the people that aren't.
I know, and yet we are.
Oh. Well, lucky us.
Lucky me.
And lucky me.
And lucky me.
And lucky us. The second constraint that we chose is to use no photographic material in the design of the show. Almost right away, we discovered that silhouettes and shapes were far more evocative. The detail in a photographic image seemed to just demand further detail. So instead, we made simple and sparing use of silhouettes, like the table that you just saw, or this television.
Thank you for coming.
Clearly, the TV isn't real, but somehow the brain accepts it. And it's weird, you know, I just don't think that would happen with a photographic image. I think we'd feel the inadequacy of the image. By the way, acting in this environment is kind of a mind trip. If my colleague here enters to play the next bit of a scene with me, you know, we're pretending that this TV is here between us and that she can't, you know, just come across the room and throttle me as she'd like to. But of course it's not. I mean, she could walk through that TV. So we have to really hit our marks. I mean, we're constrained too as actors. You can't just get carried away by your emotions and walk through the TV, or else the illusion is ruined. But we're constrained in other ways too. I mean, these images, these two-dimensional images, tend to play when we're up against the wall in a kind of a theater in low relief setting. When we step downstage a bit, it starts to be clear to you folks here and you guys over here that we're three-dimensional and that the TV really isn't. So that's another constraint. And to not be able to use depth is a huge trade-off, particularly as a director. But there are other things that we gained, things that we found we were able to do only because we had a projector. Now, it's worth noting that the writing of the play happened in parallel with the creation of the design. And the opportunities that the design concept presented influenced how I wrote, because some things work really well in this setting and other things really don't. Like, for instance, there's 4 actors in the show, as I said, but in a play with no depth, it's very hard to have more than 2 people on stage for any length of time. At 2B, we build our work to tour, and we put real value in the precision of our production design. We spend a lot of time getting the thing looking and sounding just right. And it's a challenge to maintain that as you move from venue to venue and city to city, country to country. Using a projector as the only light source meant that we could have a show that would maintain its extremely precise design in under-equipped spaces and in unconventional spaces, such as school gymnasiums, community halls, large conference rooms. I love this image. You know why I love this image? Because of this. That shouldn't be possible. I mean, that's just a line on the, that's just a shadow. And of course, it doesn't take you long to figure out what's going on. I mean, this thing has about 1 to 3 seconds of how they do that in it. Once you do figure out what's going on, because it is very simple, it gets even cooler because you stop asking yourself, how'd they do that? And you start asking, how'd they come up with that? You start to appreciate the creativity that went into the image. Now, there's a danger in this, I have to admit. You have to ask yourself, is there a risk of pulling the audience out of the story while you just do cool tricks? Well, of course there is. It's a question that we asked ourselves over and over again. For sure, we pursued fun images, but we also cut a lot of cool stuff because it took us out of the story. That being said, one of the interesting discoveries with this show is that the audience seems to be able to both stay inside the story but also appreciate the artifice and the craft of the design. Audiences are capable of a double consciousness that we don't often give them credit for. Theater is a naive medium, certainly when compared with film, which can create realistic pictures of the Titanic sinking or a 19th century chateau. In theater, which doesn't really do realistic pictures all that well, we need to find creative ways to tell stories. We often need a different design and storytelling language that's not really about a one-to-one representation. And you know, often the most exciting theater happens when the audience is aware of that constraint, that naivety, the challenge of making the image, where the constraints of the medium are on the table. And people can see and appreciate the creative choices that are being made to help tell the story. In this kind of theater, the story is told through design and direction, is as much part of the experience as the story itself. Think about Julie Taymor's Broadway production of The Lion King. The masks that sit on top of the actors' heads are a wonderfully creative solution to the problem of having humans play animals on stage. And incidentally, the word problem here can be substituted for opportunity. I was working with a director in Toronto once on the adaptation of a short story that was full of challenges and problems, shifting locations, you know, short scenes followed by long scenes in exotic locales. And he said, you know, how we solve these problems is the show. Choosing to work within the constraints that I've described is actually a way of presenting ourselves with a number of problems. When we as an audience see a clever and imaginative solution to a problem, something fires in our imagination. We say, ah, and that part of the brain that gets satisfaction whenever we see something new and clever gets a little chemical reward. And that's good, because actually theater doesn't happen on a stage. It doesn't happen in a theater. Theater happens in the mind of the audience. And everything that we do up here on stage, all the lighting and the set and the acting, the words, all of that stuff is just to catalyze an imaginative and chemical process that is the audience's experience of the show, that is the theater. The imagination is the stage. That's where it all plays out. And fortunately for us, that imagination, if you access it in the right way and you nurture it along the way from moment to moment, is vast, fluid, and willing. But sustaining it is a delicate business. I mean, it's easy for the imaginative flow to be interrupted. A moment of bad acting will interrupt it. A moment of implausible writing will interrupt it. This interrupts it. And it's tricky because the moment when that flow is interrupted is not always obvious. When the imaginative floodgates close, the audience isn't often even aware of it. Most often their mind starts to wander. They start thinking about their grocery bills, or what year was this theater built in? Or I wonder if the Cubs will ever win another series. At least that's what happens to me. My mind starts to wander. I can almost always trace that back, though, to a moment when the show lost me. Now, what role does design play in all this? Is it possible for design to work with the actor and the writing to keep the imaginative flow going? Of course it is. If you find ways to activate and sustain that imagination, you can do anything. You can go anywhere. You can tell any story. You can defy physics. We're going to show you one more scene from the show. I haven't talked a lot about the story of the show, so just to give you a little bit of context for where we're at. Do you remember the happy couple from the dinner table scene? Their names are Alan and Sybil, and at this point in the play, things are going very bad for them. Their baby was born, but it didn't survive its first week. Sybil has basically stopped talking. Alan has lost his job, and just before this scene, he has walked in on Sybil in the arms of his brother-in-law, Louis. It's kind of a modern Job story, actually. Well, I guess I'm a bit surprised. Do you hear me? I mean, you do hear me, right? Because I'm talking, and I want to know that what you're doing is in fact conscious, that you're not just shutting me out inadvertently or something. I mean, you're not deaf. I know you're not deaf.
I hear you, Louis. I mean, Alan.
Oh, good. Why?
I don't know.
But really, though, why? Well,
I guess I don't know.
I think you do.
What do you think, Alan? That I am having an affair?
I'm sorry, what the hell am I supposed to think? Well, that's just fucking terrific.
I'm not.
Deny it a little more forcefully, Sib.
I am not fighting with you.
Well, I am! And more silence.
Please.
Don't tell me to shut up. Don't tell me to please shut up. Don't beg me. Don't assume that I am just going to give up and be happy living with a walking corpse for the rest of my life, because I'm not. You're taking away my right to fight for us. Fuck!
I'm going to sleep in the baby's room.
You know, this scene at once is playful in its staging and also devastating in its content. It was a really nice discovery for us that these two tones could coexist in the same moment. Anne-Marie and I were talking in preparation for this presentation about the difference between movies and theater. One of the things that she observed was that she's heard a lot of people, and I've heard this too, people saying, oh yeah, I went and saw a play once and it was really, really terrible and I'm never going to the theater again. But we also observed that you don't hear that same thing about movies. People don't just see a bad movie and then give up on the whole art form. But what that tells me is that as theater makers, we have to be extremely rigorous. We have to work damn hard to make sure that we're making space for the audience's imagination in everything we do, from the acting to the writing to the design. Thanks very much.